recording.
Hi there, welcome to Cargo Film Presents. I'm Dave.
I'm Dan.
And on Cargo Film Presents, we talk documentary films we like and that we would recommend you check out. Today we'll be talking about the film Crazy, Not Insane. It's a film directed by the Academy Award winner and prolific filmmaker Alex Gibney. And the film follows Dr. Dorothy Lewis, a psychiatrist who has dedicated her career to studying murderers and seeking answers as to why people kill. It explores her lifelong investigation to look beyond the belief that people are evil and into the minds of killers to show the causes for their tragic choices.
Oh, the most disturbed, the most psychotic, or the most brain damaged killers do the most bizarre, grotesque, horrendous kinds of things. Courts are all far more curious about what the murderer did than about why they did it.
The film highlights Dr. Lewis's research using videotaped death row interviews to show neurological dysfunction of infamous murderers such as Arthur Shawcross and Ted Bundy, to challenge the notion that murderers are made and not born. What did you think, Dan? And nice to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, this is our first Cargo Film Presents of the year, I think. So
correct.
Kicking it off with some murder, violence, serial killers. I guess that's the way to start 2021.
Why the hell not? You know, everybody else is dipping their toe in those waters.
That's
we
right.
As well.
Yeah, the documentary started off with the question, you know, I always ask myself when I get up in the morning, which is, do you ever wonder why you don't murder people?
That's clearly before you have your coffee.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, that's essentially the starting off point, right, for Dr. Lewis. And in the documentary, she, as a kid, I guess, asked herself this question, and it sort of set her on a course of examining this question of why human beings commit extraordinary acts of violence. You know, she talks about I guess maybe seeing the Nuremberg trials, and that was
something like that. Yeah, having something to do with being aware of the Nazis and all of that business.
That's right, and yeah, that kind of starts her journey off in investigating this question. Really, yeah, are people born evil? Is there real evil? Are there real sociopaths out there? And yeah, we go on this sort of journey. I guess it's a bit of a half biography, sort of half kind of investigation of these questions.
Yeah, it is. I think you're right. I mean, and I like that choice of exploring these questions by attaching these questions to a person that is, an expert in the field. You know, the film was it was difficult to watch for me, and it also has several layers, right? I mean, beyond the stuff that we're talking about, it also explores the kind of the death penalty itself, questioning whether it's a deterrent. No, it isn't. And whether, whether the more moral and humane thing to do is not to execute what Dr. Lewis, thinks is, are sick people, rather than to study them so that we can find ways to rehabilitate people like that. And it spends a lot of time also exploring this idea of multiple personality disorder, which really I guess I didn't realize is still a very controversial diagnosis. And Dr. Lewis suggests indeed that it is real, and often that is the diagnosis of a lot of these killers and serial killers. So I also like the fact that she's a complicated character with strong opinions. She's very likable on screen. She's great on screen, and very smart and very single-minded, and I feel like ultimately she has a positive view of human nature, because she doesn't buy into this biblical idea of good and evil. There's a reason why these people do what they do. This notion of evil's it's not by choice. It's a kind of a corruption of the brain at a neurological level, right? And we should be looking for ways to help people like that. So, but she's not controversial in her methods. She's been known to use hypnosis, and some speculate that isn't necessarily a scientific method of examination. So anyway, complicated character, which is great for a documentary subject, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I also found that, fairly illuminating in this idea. I think we hear so much about violence being innate to human beings, the tendency and the capacity of human beings for violence. There seems to be this assumption that, humans are violent and potentially evil, I guess. And we don't maybe hear enough about some of this research into, the sort of brain problems, the, possible neurological problems that could be at the root of some of these extreme acts of violence. And also it just the idea that some of the sort of serial killers we often see highlighted in the media, who commit such lurid and bizarre and crazy acts, they might have some of the most neurological problems. So it would sort of make, the connection there I thought was really interesting that I hadn't really heard before. So I thought that was an interesting takeaway from it, is like, yeah, of course, some of these people who do insane, really just bizarre, crazy, commit crazy crimes and series of crimes, have really, really bad neurological problems. So yeah, that was interesting. Trying to sort of dig for this recipe of violence instead of just saying, well, evil is innate. There's this concept of evil out there. Actually sort of her journey to dig into this question, I thought was a worthwhile one to take. But you're right. Yeah. A controversial method, a controversial figure. I mean, we should say there are some people, well, maybe some, I think there was at least one sort of dissenting voice who was perhaps critical of her methods in the film.
Well, yeah, but I mean, she's a pioneer in this area, right? So she's like credited with influencing Supreme Court rulings on capital punishment on 2 different occasions at least, and yeah, there isn't a consensus, but I think the film speaks to that idea that in popular culture people believe, we've seen this multiple personality disorder phenomena play out in so many different cultural products that I think we're led to believe that in fact it's true, but in fact the jury seems to be still out, even though Dr. Lewis presents a pretty convincing case, that it does exist.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was hoping myself for a little bit more of a robust conversation around that, because it is so central, I guess, to, where you then land on things like capital punishment, or, what sort of punishments these crimes should receive. And so I was just curious, because clearly, Dr. Lewis, this is her pioneering field, and you're kind of wondering how ubiquitous or widespread that is. Maybe, like, if you're looking at serial killers or criminals who have committed, extremely violent acts, what percentage, what number of those people have, this recipe for violence that she's sort of identified of, psychotic thinking, perhaps childhood abuse, and, neurological or brain problems. Like, are we talking, is this, all of them, some of them? I was just curious about that area. Right. Sure. That was a big problem for me, but it would have been nice maybe to just have a little bit more of a conversation around that. And I mean, I understand that, I guess, Gibney in the film had, since she was a kind of an outsider in that field, we needed to kind of go establish her story and understand that, you know, she was ridiculed. She was sort of considered kind of a quack for a while until she could really establish this pattern and establish some of this data. But yeah, it would have been nice to maybe have a where we sort of are today, you know, with this conversation.
She was a pioneer, and pioneers are often not treated well.
It was early in my career. My work was questionable.
They did a form of interviewing that can cause vulnerable people to believe they have more than one personality.
It's the sort of argument of the film is like, once you acknowledge that these people have psychological problems, possible brain problems, childhood abuse, then you're thinking, well, they may not be competent to stand trial, and you know, maybe they shouldn't be punished and sent to death. You know, we should have other remedies for these people. So,
the court in the United States only requires a defendant to understand that what crimes they are accused of and what the consequences of those crimes are to be found legally sane in a court of law, which, you know, they make the point that is an extremely low bar to deem someone, you know, sane to be able to stand trial. So, you know, there's that layer as well of being critical of the justice system. And you know, at a certain point, I guess it starts to feel like a bit of an Errol Morris doc. I don't know about you. I thought of Errol Morris. You know, some of his films that he's done, they start to parade one subject after another, and try. I guess they try to inform different dimensions of the subject that they're exploring, which I understand. I suppose maybe they have one or two too many of those subjects documented. Considering the film is about 2 hours, they probably could have knocked off one or two of those profiles and had a little bit of a shorter run time. But you know, there are exceptions, and you know, when they present, I'm curious to hear what your take is on this, when they present the man who, you know, they is hired out for his services to be an executioner, and you know, Dr. Lewis examines this person, and this man hasn't committed a crime, legally speaking, in the legal sense, but he's held up in his example of someone that Dr. Lewis really despises for the work that he's doing. And while he seems to portray his acts as something as, you know, just a source of income, it's a job, and that he's completely unaffected by, the big reveal in that story, of course, is when he shows paintings of that he paints after each execution. That's the only time he ever paints. And they all look like variation of like an Edward Munch, The Scream, right? I mean, yeah. And then, you know, contrary to what he's portraying, that in fact, well, he might be suffering some consequences here that he's really not admitting to himself or letting on. It kind of underscores the emotional effects of, you know, killing, even when it's sanctioned, you know, by society. I thought that was pretty fascinating as kind of presenting an alternative.
Yeah, you know, I was trying to get some of those paintings on eBay the other day, but I couldn't find them. I think you're right. I mean, it really, that's why, you know, I guess I found that, yeah, the doc more maybe thought-provoking, opening up some of these questions rather than necessarily answering them, because, right, you know, yeah, all of the depictions, or a lot of the depictions of serial killers and, you know, serial murderers are of people who have a total lack of empathy. I mean, you know, we have this obsession with, you know, people, sociopaths, psychopaths, and representing this lack of just any feeling or any remorse, any guilt.
Right.
You know, and what that episode, what that, you know, encounter really showed is that this guy apparently seemed to show, you know, no remorse, no concern. And then, you know, he was repressing it or whatever. It was all coming out in those paintings, and they were terrifying. Like, oh my God, this guy really has a strong emotional response to it. So it just really challenged this idea of, well, you know, our serial killers, our people, our sociopaths, is that really true? You know, this sort of popular conception about them. Do some of these people actually have, you know, these emotional, I don't know, they appear in other forms, in paintings, or, you know, in the actual serial killers that she interviews, they come out in their other identities and their alters that we see shifting. Yeah, I mean, what did you think about that? I mean, I think that was also one of one of the better points of the film is that you got, the footage, you got this sort of amazing archive that she had collected and kept of her interviews with patients, that you got to see these switches from their just regular persona to their alter ego, and this idea that, you can just shift into multiple identities. People, dissociate and become someone else. Someone else pops up.
Yeah, what did I think of that? Like, it was disturbing. I mean, it was disturbing to see. I don't think I thought too much about it. I just, felt just tremendous sadness for, people having to have suffered that much. If we're following the Dr. Lewis's line of thinking here, they have suffered that much that they would have fractured their personalities in a way, as a way of being able to keep the suffering at bay. So it was a tremendous amount of sadness. That's why it was very hard to watch those, and I would have appreciated watching maybe a couple less. I don't know if necessarily you needed to watch 5 or 6 of them. And then of course there's they roll out Ted Bundy. I have to admit, I haven't seen a lot of the entertainment products around his story. I mean, you tell me, is this the first time that trauma has been depicted in his personal life as an explanation for what he did? Do you know?
I'm not aware. Yeah, I kind of try and stay away from that.
Right.
Ted Bundy.
that Ted Bundy entertainment cottage industry.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was. I don't know if it's the first time it's been presented, but Lewis seemed to be one of the first to suggest that his childhood was far from perfect, and really digging into his family history and his past. I mean, from what the film says, he presented it as an idyllic, childhood, and everything was perfect. And that was, I think, what was so scary for people at the time.
Correct.
That you would think
that was the big deal with that story, was that the fact that this seemingly normal, good-looking individual having, completely normal upbringing lifestyle actually, was this serial killer. Yeah, that was the big hook to that story. But in fact, it doesn't seem to be the case. It's actually a pretty sordid and salacious story, if it's true.
Yeah. And I guess she was, seemed to be one of the first to really dig into that family history as a way to understand, not necessarily explain, but at least understand, Ted's later actions. And it sounded like he had quite a horrible childhood, and was sent away to an orphanage and then taken back. And his grandfather was presented as his father, who apparently was a very violent and abusive man. And I guess also she speculates, which I suppose still remains kind of controversial, that Ted Bundy was possibly had multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorders. They show some love letters that he had signed as Sam or someone else. The handwriting was different.
Well, it was Sam as his grandfather's name.
Right.
Yeah, I know. They didn't delve too much into that. I mean, I don't think because she only had the one interview with him for several hours right before he was executed. So I don't think she was able to follow up some of that examination, the case. The film, of course, also raises the question of why we're so fascinated with these crimes, stories, and the nature of these stories, and why people kill. Doesn't answer this, but only to say that, we do, and you're left thinking that these neurological abuses and illnesses at some level kind of explains these murders. And so if that's the case, doesn't it remove some of the intrigue of some of these stories, at least to understand that you're kind of left feeling a little sad that people who are driven to, commit some of these crimes clearly are dealing with a trauma that's never been addressed.
Yeah, for me, definitely, personally. I mean, I suppose it won't stop some people from still being fascinated by the lurid details and, gory nature, just freakiness of some of this stuff. But I think once you understand that this, part of this is a product of extreme abuse and neurological problems or brain injuries, which also explains why they're so bizarre sometimes. I mean, it's just, I don't know how you can continue to derive pleasure or entertainment from that. But I don't see that kind of ending anytime soon.
No.
And
doesn't look like it is.
And as Gibney in the film points out, I mean, part of this, it becomes very politicized. He sort of also looks at the shift in the culture towards a very, tough on crime. Like you may have mentioned, this law and order, nature, this sort of conservative shift where now it's all about, how many people can you execute in your state, and that, sort of guarantees a certain amount of political credibility and electability. And so it becomes less able to maybe have that conversation. I don't know, maybe we will be able to have more of that conversation going forward, but it's certainly we had.
No, it's a very good point. It's a very good point, and that's why exploring these questions are important, because it influences the cultural conversation, influences the political conversation, and the policies that are made around these questions. So, I mean, and I just want to say one last thing. I mean, ultimately, obviously, this film only looks at this sliver of the population and why they commit these acts. There are many other instances, as you referred to a bit earlier. You touched upon many other instances of people killing, whether it's at a mass, large scale, which the kind of inciting incident for Dr. Lewis being aware of the Nazis and the plan of mass extermination of a large group of people at that scale, to even to why people in different criminal organizations have people whose sole job is to exterminate opponents and so on. So it doesn't address these types of killings, but so all to say that it speaks to a very small section of that subset.
Yeah, completely. I mean, that's a big question I was left with. And then also I thought, one last thought for me as well is, I thought that, they do point the finger at the, kind of tough on crime law and order shift that we saw, which was across the political spectrum. It wasn't just Republicans, Democrats
absolutely,
as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton also, tough, with this tough on crime stance. Biden pops up for a second.
Yep.
But also I thought, it was also, pervasive in academia as well. I mean, you did see a lot of books that were coming out at the time that were, written by like evolutionary psychologists who were, saying that we're arguing in some ways that violence was innate to human beings. And so this wasn't just, it wasn't just a political idea, popular culture idea. And this is something that was coming from academia and from intellectual circles as well, that I think fed into the culture at the time. And, I wish that, I appreciate, sometimes pointing the finger, pointing out the political figures, but I think they were also, it would be interesting to look at some of the academics and intellectuals who were putting forward these ideas about violence being innate and it being, an evolutionary adaptation, as for human beings. And so, that was something I thought would have been an interesting, point to pick up, maybe for Gibney.
Right. Yep. No, I can see that. In terms of little bit of trivia, as we're nearing the end, did you know that so Alex Gibney found Dr. Lewis in the course of developing a dramatic series with Laura Dern about a psychiatrist whose job it is to discover, which death row inmates were sane enough to be executed, and then he found himself intrigued by Dr. Lewis and her work and her persona, and he decided to make a documentary about her. So I don't know what happened to that Laura Dern project.
Is that coming out? You figure that maybe still in the works. And she reads the Lewis's book in the film.
Yeah, she does. Yeah,
maybe that.
Yeah.
Film will be coming out soon.
There you go. A 1-2 punch. Gibney, maximizing the material there.
That's right.
Let's not just make a narrative film. Let's make a documentary film as well. And who knows? Maybe he might be putting on a Broadway show next year too.
I can just hear the songs now. Are people evil?
Lots of rich material there. Are you kidding?
That would be a great musical, Broadway musical.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So last question. What is your, Alex Gibney, as we said off the top, very prolific, been working for many, many years. What is your favorite Alex Gibney film of the ones you've seen?
Tough call. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I think my introduction to Gibney was Taxi to the Dark Side. So that certainly, put his work on the map. And but I guess maybe Enron, if I think about it. I mean, it's the one
that's probably I would
out for me.
Yeah, I would say the same. I remember being riveted by watching those disclosures as they happen in the film. And for me, an honorable mention, being Canadian, is a film he did called The Last Gladiators, about players in hockey that make a paycheck fighting for their teams and the toll it takes on these players. Worth checking out as well, because it's a topic I've long been fascinated with, and not many people have documented it, but I thought he did a good job with it. So
that's a real paying job role. It's not just he's the guy that's going to get into fights on the team. There's an actual
yes, there are people that are on teams to be the enforcer of a team, and they not all of them, but they generally lack the hockey skills of everybody else on the team, except for their ability to be able to fight. Yes,
right.
Indeed. Yep.
Many ways to make a living.
And so there you go. Check it out. We think that there's a lot of interesting stuff there, right? In this film. And I think, where can we watch that? Do you remember?
HBO Max.
That's right. Yeah. HBO Max. Check it out. Thanks for tuning in. Excuse me. Let's try it again. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. See you, Dan.
Take care.